visiting precedents is less about necessarily learning from them, but creating a common language with the owner. So when you start putting ideas before them, once you get into design, you can say, hey, do you remember what we saw in this building? Do you remember your reaction to it? Maybe it was favorable, maybe it wasn't.
Let's start by talking about the Equator Tower. So Kuala Lumpur, why is the Equator Tower so well suited for Kuala Lumpur? Describe the building and what makes it fit.
It's really the fact that it was a Muslim country. So the call to prayer obviously overloads elevators if you're attempting to bring the population out of the building. So we created these very, very large prayer floors at equipoints through the height of the building. And so the combination of wanting to have the ideal of a totally transparent building at night, plus the fact that we had these very large prayer floors that allowed us to create a unique geometry, meant that we could implement this idea of a retractable skin, something that would go from the larger prayer floor and then get retracted to where it touches the tower. And so that it was very much, although it's hard to say that it is a contextual building, it's very much of its context and of its use and its demand. Yeah.
What are these prayer floors like? Because that sounds interesting to me. And how could they be adapted to other projects that say they're not used for prayer, but I would imagine that you could have a similar sort of integration of either public space or otherwise programmed space throughout an office tower like that?
We're actually doing a project in Perth that sort of uses that same concept. It's not for prayer, but it's a multi-use building. And the other towers around it have a very similar program mix. And so we argued that in order to make the building distinguish itself, to actually take those public elements and put them up into the middle of the building. And similarly, then you can have the population of the building aggregating to the middle, but also the intent of shuttling the public up to that sort of interstitial, we would call it the plus. It happens to have a plus shape, but so it became branded the plus.
Tell us about the R6 project in Seoul and what makes that a noteworthy project. What should other people be interested to see in that project?
It's the world's largest single-loaded corridor. And we took that building and sort of stretched it out, and put the cores at either end, and wrapped them in a donut around that. And so the units are incredibly thin, have daylight on both sides, cross ventilation. And there's also these kind of unique elements on the interior of the courtyard. They're effectively glassed-in balconies.
Yeah.
But because the units were so small, it was important to create relief and to create, move people into the center of the building. And so they were this kind of unusual hanging garden of people throughout the entire center.
So both the projects you've been talking about, R6 and the Equator Tower, both very responsive to some of the particular needs of the tenants. How do you go about assessing the needs of your future tenants?
For a project in which we have the owner and or user accessible to us during design, which is the way we much prefer to work, then we ask the owners to give us the luxury of what we call a thinking phase, to actually suspend design for up to 3 months and to just work through these kinds of issues with them. Now the reality is we tend to be designing and playing in the background, and so we're constantly correlating ideas and issues that are coming out of that with potential solutions. We like to go see precedents with the owner. Often there's no literal precedent because we're trying to do something new, but so we'll go see things that you might aggregate together. You could say, take a piece of this and this and this might start to look like some form of precedent. But actually visiting precedents is less about necessarily learning from them, but creating a common language with the owner. So when you start putting ideas before them, once you get into design, you can say, hey, do you remember what we saw in this building? Do you remember your reaction to it? Maybe it was favorable, maybe it wasn't. What we've discovered is that by taking the time to think with our clients in advance, we can actually move through conventional design phases with much greater ease and collegiality and success. And so the project actually moves quite swiftly. It sort of gains speed and then goes very, very fast because everything can be discussed with great precision.